Charles Goodnight was born on March 5, 1836, the fourth of five children to Charles and Charlotte Goodnight on their family farm in Macoupin County, Illinois. In 1841, when Charles was 5, his father died of pneumonia, and soon after his mother remarried Hiram Doherty, a nearby farmer. Charles only went to formal school for a total of 6 months. In late 1845, the family traveled 800 miles to near Nashville on the Brazos in Milam County, Texas, with Charles riding south bareback on a white-faced horse named Blaze. He was proud that he was born the same year the Republic of Texas was founded, and that he joined Texas the year it became part of the United States. Growing up in the Brazos River bottom, Charles was taught how to hunt and track by an old Indian man named Caddo Jake. At age 11, Charles started working for nearby farmers, and by 15, he was a jockey in horse races at Port Sullivan. But he wasn't happy with that work, so he went back to his widowed mother and younger siblings, working on various farms and plantations. He even supervised enslaved black workers and spent 2 years hauling goods with ox carts. In 1853, his mother remarried Adam Sheik, a Methodist preacher. This led to a partnership between Charles and his stepbrother, John Wesley Sheik, 3 years later. They thought about going to California, but Sheik's brother-in-law, Claiborne Varner, convinced them to take care of about 400 cattle along the Brazos River for 10 years, sharing the profits. In 1857, the two young men moved their herd from the Brazos River to Keechee Valley in Palo Pinto County. At Black Springs, they built a log cabin with a stone chimney, and in 1858, they brought their parents to live there. Goodnight continued to haul cotton and supplies to Houston for a while, but after Wes Sheik got married, Charles took on the full responsibility of caring for the lean, wild Texas cattle. With his hunting and trail skills, he quickly learned how to survive in the wilderness. Around this time, Charles met Oliver Loving, who was also raising cattle in the West Cross timbers. When the Colorado Gold Rush began, Goodnight worked with Loving to help send cattle herds through Indian Territory and Kansas to mining camps in the Rocky Mountains. As conflicts with Native Americans grew in northwest Texas, disputes continued over settlements along the Brazos River and Upper Clear Fork. Goodnight and his neighbors decided to join Captain Jack Curitan's Ranger Company. Goodnight served as a scout and guide for this group. In December 1860, Goodnight found a trail leading to Peta Nocona's Comanche camp along the Pease River and reported it to Curitan and Captain Ross. He led the Rangers to that Native American camp and took part in the attack on December 18th. That's when Cynthia Ann Parker was brought back. When the Civil War started, Curitan's Rangers, including Goodnight, were assigned to the Frontier Regiment. For most of the war, Goodnight, along with James E. McCord, James B. Berry, and at Aubenchain, chased Native Americans and outlaws from the Canadian River to the Upper Colorado and Brazos rivers. His knowledge of the vast prairie and Llano Estacado, which he gained during this time, would become very useful later on. In 1864, when his time in the Army was over, Goodnight went back to Palo Pinto County. There, he and other cowboys spent a year trying to get the cattle business going again in that wild frontier. He looked for a new ranch along Elm Creek in Throckmorton County, but in September of 1865, about 2,000 of his cattle were stolen by Native Americans. Back then, the cattle market in Texas wasn't very good. So Goodnight thought he could sell his cattle for more money to the Indian agencies and military bases in New Mexico, where they really needed beef. In the spring of 1866, he and Loving drove cattle from Fort Belknap through Horsehead Crossing on the Pecos River, all the way to Fort Sumner. There, they sold the cattle for 8 cents a pound to feed the Native Americans. 18 cowboys joined them on this trip, including Bose Icard, Robert Clay Allison, and one-armed Bill Wilson. Goodnight even brought and used the first chuck wagon for this journey. The path they made became known as the Goodnight-Loving Trail, and later, it became one of the most used cattle trails in the Southwest. In 1867, at the end of their third trip to Fort Sumner, Loving was hurt in a fight with Native Americans and passed away. But Goodnight kept sharing the profits with Loving's family, and later, he brought Loving's body back to Weatherford for burial. In the late 1860s, Goodnight kept up his work of delivering herds along the Pecos River, especially at Bosque Grande, which was downstream from Fort Sumner. He also got cattle from John S. Chisholm and other Texas cowboys, moving thousands of cattle to Colorado and Wyoming. There, he sold them to ranchers in the north, like John Wesley Iliff and the Thatcher brothers. Goodnight's cattle herds were sometimes attacked by robbers and Native Americans, especially during a time when there was a lot of illegal trading with the Comancheros. In the winter of 1869, he built the Rock Canyon Ranch, 5 miles west of Pueblo, Colorado, along the Arkansas River, and branded his cattle with Pat. It was right around that time that everyone started calling him Colonel. On July 26, 1870, Goodnight married his longtime sweetheart, Molly Dyer. Molly was a teacher in Weatherford. The wedding took place at a relative's home in Hickman, Kentucky. After the wedding, the newlyweds returned to Rock Canyon, which would be their home for the next 6 years. Goodnight continued to manage his cattle. In 1871, he worked with John Chisholm and made a profit of $17,000. He also started farming with irrigation and planted apple trees. He invested a lot in farmland and city lots in Pueblo. Not only that, he helped establish the Stock Growers Bank in Pueblo and was involved in various businesses, including an opera house and a meatpacking plant in Los Animas. With his neighbors, cattleman Henry Cresswell and the Thatcher family, he helped form Colorado's first Cattlemen's Association in November 1871. In 1875, he opened the Goodnight Trail, which went from Alamogordo Creek in New Mexico to Granada, Colorado. However, due to too many cattle and the panic of 1873, Goodnight lost a lot of his wealth. To get through this tough time, Goodnight went looking for new grasslands. After taking his wife to her relatives in California, in the fall of 1875, he gathered the remaining longhorn cattle, about 1,600 of them. Then, he moved those cattle to a camp in Rincon de las Piedras, New Mexico, up the Canadian River for the winter. He and his Mexican cowhand, Panchito, Little Frank, began looking for a large area in the Texas Panhandle that the Native Americans had recently left, and they decided that Palo Duro Canyon was the best place to set up a ranch. After that, he went back to Pueblo to borrow money and spent the time with his friends at the New Mexico camp during the calving season. And during the summer, he stayed down the Canadian River at the spot where it meets Alamocitos Creek, a place that would later be near Tascosa. Before leaving, Goodnight made a deal with Casimiro Romero. The agreement was that the pastores, shepherds, of New Mexico would only use the Canadian River and its branches, and Goodnight would have exclusive use of the Red River headwaters and the canyon. Then, he hired Nicolas Martinez, who used to be a Comanchero, to guide them, as Martinez knew all the old Native American trails. After that, Goodnight and his group headed east to Tecova Springs, and from there, they went southeast across the flat land towards Palo Duro Canyon. On October 23, 1876, they reached the rim of the canyon in Randall County and set up camp there. The first group of cowboys in the Panhandle included James T. Hughes, the son of English writer Thomas Hughes, J.C. Johnston, who later became an executive at the Matador Ranch, Goodnight's brother-in-law, Lee Richmond Dyer, Irishman Dave McCormick, and Panchito. While they waited with the cattle at the canyon rim, Goodnight and Martinez went to find a path into the canyon and a good spot for the ranch headquarters. There were still a lot of buffalo at the bottom of the canyon, so the cowboys were busy chasing them away for about 24 kilometers to make room for the cattle. It took them 2 days to lead the cattle down the steep path, carrying their supplies on mules. Inside what is now Palo Duro Canyon State Park, Goodnight built his first temporary home. It was a dugout hut with a roof made of cottonwood and cedar logs, and beams made from abandoned Comanche lodge poles. Later, in Armstrong County, further to the southeast, where the canyon floor widened, he built a comfortable 3-room ranch house using only local wood and no nails. He also built fences and a smokehouse there, and he grew very fond of the place, calling it his home ranch. Goodnight left the ranch in the care of Lee Dyer and went with Martinez to Los Animas to buy needed supplies. In February 1877, he returned to check on his men, passing through Camp Supply and Fort Elliott. Near Fort Elliott at Commission Creek, he met with Dutch Henry Bourne's outlaw group and made them promise to stay north of the river, sealing the deal with drinks. Finding the home ranch in good shape, Goodnight returned to Colorado to raise money for expanding the ranch and to prepare to bring his wife to their new home. In Denver, he met with John G. Adair at Adair's brokerage firm. Goodnight had borrowed $30,000 from him there in March of the previous year. Adair agreed to help expand the ranch into a large-scale operation. Then, in May 1877, the Goodnights and Adairs, along with 4 cowboys, arrived at the home ranch with 4 wagons loaded with 100 Durham bulls and supplies. On June 18th, they signed a 5-year contract, and the J.A. Ranch was born. Goodnight received a 1/3 share and an annual salary of $2,500 as the resident manager. For 11 years at the JA Ranch, Goodnight expanded the ranch, increased the number of cattle, and worked to bring order to the region. In the summer of 1878, he led the first JA trail herd to Dodge City, Kansas, with the famous lead steer, Old Blue, at the front. That was the closest railroad. The Palo Duro Dodge City trail he blazed continued to be used by many ranchers in the Panhandle region. That fall, when struggling Native Americans from the reservation came to hunt the few remaining buffalo, Goodnight made a famous agreement with Quanah Parker of the Comanche. He promised to give them 2 cattle every other day for his people, on the condition that they wouldn't bother the JA cattle. In 1879, Goodnight moved the JA Ranch headquarters to its current location. He strictly forbade gambling, drinking, and fighting, but was still able to hire the cowboys he needed. In 1880, Goodnight helped establish the Panhandle Stockmen's Association and became its first president. 2 years later, he bought the Keetack, Lazy F Ranch, and is said to have built the first barbed wire fence in the Panhandle. John Adair's arrogance sometimes tested Goodnight's patience, but he maintained a close relationship with Mrs. Adair, and in 1882, their contract was renewed, increasing his annual salary to $7,500. That's about $236,000 in today's money. When Adair died in 1885, the JA Ranch was at its largest, spanning 1.325 million acres, with over 100,000 head of cattle that Goodnight had carefully selected and raised. Goodnight also pioneered artificial water sources and the introduction of permanent, owned pastures. He was also an early adopter of selective breeding for improvement, introducing Hereford bulls to create one of the top cattle herds in the nation. He spent weeks at the Kansas City stockyards, buying and selling cattle to improve the quality of his herd. At his wife's suggestion, he also began raising buffalo for livestock using a buffalo bull named Old Sykes, and crossbred bison with Angus to create Catalo. He also invented a practical side saddle with a horn for his wife to rest her left knee. In 1886, Goodnight began investing in the Interstate Land Company with 2 city partners. He was selling shares of land along the Texas-New Mexico border, which had been bought from the old Spanish land grant of Bael's Royuela. At the same time, he got caught up in the grass lease dispute, where he became a symbol of the big ranch owners. His actions in this dispute were heavily criticized by newspapers, who even said he stole money from the children of Texas. Also, because of big changes happening in the cattle business, like recent droughts, lower beef prices, and the arrival of railroads and farmers, he really felt he had to reduce the amount of land he owned. Because of these reasons, and also because he had a life-threatening stomach illness, Goodnight decided to give up his share of the JA Ranch and scale back his ranching business after his second contract ended in 1887. When the land was divided, he kept some rights to the Keetack Ranch and sold half of it to L.R. Moore of Kansas City. Even so, Mrs. Adair kept Goodnight on as the manager of the JA Ranch until John C. Farrington took over in 1888. Right after he left the JA Ranch, Goodnight bought 160 plots of land near the Fort Worth-Denver City line in Armstrong County, including the Sakura Sag Ranch and school lands. And he built a large, beautiful 2-story ranch house near the town named after him, and he and his wife moved in on December 27, 1887. He moved a herd of 250 buffalo to this small ranch and officially started the Goodnight Sayer Ranching Company. J.W., Johnny Martin, became the foreman and later a partner. After selling his remaining share of the Keetack Ranch to Moore in 1890, he invested a lot of money in gold and silver mining in the mountains of southern Chihuahua, Mexico, with William McCamey and Avery L. Matlock, but it didn't work out. Also, Goodnight lost a lot of money because of his investment in the Interstate Land Company after a federal court decided that the Bael's Royuela land grant was not valid. In 1893, he and some cowboys got paid back for damages from the Comanchero trade in the 1860s. Remembering that he didn't get much schooling himself, Colonel and Mrs. Goodnight opened Goodnight College in the town of Goodnight in 1898. After leaving the Goodnight-Thayer Company in 1900, the Colonel kept ranching on only 60 sections around his home and near the railroad. There, he kept experimenting with raising buffalo, and also kept elk, antelope, and different birds in zoo-like pens. The Goodnight Ranch became a popular spot for tourists in the Panhandle, and they even served buffalo meat meals. Goodnight's buffalo were sent to New York and other cities in the East, Yellowstone National Park, and even Europe. His work to save wildlife was praised by naturalists like William T. Hornaday Edmund Seymour, and Ernest Thompson Seton. Goodnight was close to Quanah Parker and other leaders of the Plains Indians in Oklahoma. He sometimes held buffalo hunts for old warriors and also connected with the Pueblo people in New Mexico. He spoke up for them in Congress and even gave one tribe a herd of buffalo. Plus, he grew wheat for the first time in Armstrong County and did farming experiments, encouraged by the famous plant expert Luther Burbank. That's why the Colonel was also called the Burbank of the Plains. The Goodnights didn't have kids, but they often let college students stay with them who helped with office and house chores. In 1905, they hired a female housekeeper and raised her son, Cleo Hubbard, as their own child. After his wife passed away in April 1926, Goodnight got very sick. But he got better with the care of a young nurse and telegraph operator named Corinne Goodnight from Butte, Montana. They had been writing letters to each other because they had the same last name. On March 5, 1927, on his 91st birthday, the Colonel married 26-year-old Corinne at the home of his nephew, Mayor Henry W. Taylor, in Clarendon. Soon after, he sold the ranch, but with the condition that he could live there for the rest of his life. He then bought a summer home in Clarendon and started spending winters in Phoenix, Arizona for his health. As a living frontier legend, he was often interviewed by Western writers, newspaper reporters, and famous historians. Even though Goodnight himself had started a church before, he didn't officially join one until July 1929. On the morning of December 12, 1929, Goodnight passed away at his winter home in Phoenix at the age of 93. He was buried next to his first wife in the Goodnight Community Cemetery. In 1935, Laura V. Hamner published a novel about his life called The No-Gun Man of Texas. But since J. Yvette's Haley's Charles Goodnight Cowman and Plainsman came out in 1936, that book has been the main scholarly work about Goodnight. Goodnight's papers are kept at the Research Center of the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum in Canyon, and items donated by Cleo Hubbard and his family are also on display. Several towns in the Panhandle have streets named after him, and so do the Charles Goodnight Memorial Trail and the road to Palo Duro Canyon State Park. There's even a dugout, believed to be his home from 1876, still standing there. Goodnight's ranch house, owned by the Mattie Hedgecoke Foundation of Amarillo since 1933, is also still standing near US Highway 287. In 1958, Goodnight was one of the first 5 people chosen for the National Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City. If you want to learn more about the Old West and cowboy history, I really recommend you go to the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City. This museum is really interesting and has lots of beautiful Western art, old guns, and Native American tools on display. I think it's worth going to Oklahoma City just for this museum. You definitely won't regret it. Well, that's all for today. If you'd like to see a video about this museum next time, let me know in the comments. I'll even film the road trip from Houston and show you around inside the museum. See you next time.